Want to know why it's called such a tease? Well, stay tuned and I'll tell you. See you in a minute. Alright, so Meddlin Madeline, new release. It's one of the exciting things about today. I love it when I can actually do a book chat on a new release. Meddlin Madeline, Such a Tease. This book, if you've seen the first book chat, you'll know a little bit about how I came up with these books. I found this image, the frame is separate. These are separate. It was just this girl. So I found this image, and the first one she's holding a plate of like chocolates, and that was pretty cool. And so I came up with Sweet on You, and then I created the story around it. And on this one, obviously there's the little teacup, and I was like, well, you know, what am I gonna do? Well, you know, such a tease. I could do the whole tea thing, and I actually thought about having her start like a book club, and they serve you know, books and tea or something, and I'm like, Madeline doesn't like the clubs and committees and stuff she's already involved in. The last thing I need to do is give her more, right? So I scrapped that idea. And I really had to look at the teas thing, and I was really having a hard time coming up with good ideas for how to do those teas. I mean, you know, and that's kind of weird for me because I'm like a big tease, and you know, I'm married to an even bigger tease. Just saying, it was weird. But then it started coming, you know, the natural teasing started happening. It's kind of like, I noticed in both of these books, alliteration. I don't usually use it, but it just naturally flows in there, and I'm blaming the whole Meddlin Madeline thing. You know, I can't figure out what else, you know. But then one thing I did that was deliberately is that there's an investment opportunity in this book. That's what the main plot is about. And that investment opportunity is called Smythe's Tea. That's right. Her old nemesis is back, and she's got her eye on him. So this book, it just kind of takes the whole thing a bit further. Now, the interesting thing about this series is not your typical mystery series. I think it's hard to get that across. I mean, it's why they're so thick. You know, the average cozy mystery is about 65,000 words, and these are about 95 to 100. It's because these are relational books that have a mystery, because the point I'm trying to show is the development, you know, how a detective can become one. You know, how, you know, maybe how Miss Marple started noticing things, how Patrick Jane from The Mentalist started seeing things, you know, just how it might have developed in a girl in 1901. And so these are not just your classic whodunit, solve it, you get to see how amazing the detective is. This is someone in the process, and it's not just the process of noticing that there's a really cool beans it's not that, you know, someone notices and solves the case. This is about, you know, her going, well, okay, but I can solve this. I can find out if this or that is true if I do this and this and this. But are those right? Is it right to do that? Is it right to, you know, trespass? Is it right to lie? Is it right to be disingenuous? You know, strictly speaking the truth, but hoping that, you know, someone else will notice. You know, so those kinds of things made it a little difficult, but I went ahead and it made it fun too, because, you know, here we are, right? So this series, that's what it's about. Each one, she's going to get better, but there's more dilemmas following it. And with this slowly increasing and growing and deepening faith of hers, you know, in book one, she was a little reticent to even consider it until someone she highly respects, you know, expressed that he is completely devoted to the Lord and he looks to the Lord for everything. Well, she had always seen that as rather fanatic and was put off by it. So to see someone else who isn't, you know, that she respects, who is like that and isn't off-putting, you know, she's developing and growing and trying to learn to balance. And should she be balancing? You know, do you balance good and evil, or do you want to be swinging way to the good? You know, I mean, it's just kind of this really cool circle that is going in with her character and having fun seeing her grow and develop. Another fun thing about this book, I've got a lot of blog posts about it. I'll link them below. This book has a historical, it opens right just days before a major historical event. Major political historical event. And I was 2/3, 3/4 through the book before I realized that I had left out the assassination of President McKinley. Her dad's mayor of a metropolis, or a burgeoning metropolis. It wasn't at that time, but it was a large city, and it was growing, and it was making its mark on the United States. And oh dear, we just completely left this out. So I go and I'm writing it and I'm researching it, and I'm writing as I'm researching, and I get, the assassination in there and all is well, and then I find out, oh great, this guy doesn't just kill the president. No, he injures the president, and 8 days later, the president dies. So now I have to interject that, because I can't use part of a historical event, because I want to make this authentic, and not use all of it, right? So I get that figured out, and oh, guess what? It's like 29 days, I think, after the president's death, they what's the word I'm looking for? They execute, 29 days later, they execute the guy who killed him, Leon Kolzov, they get him. So he gets electrocuted, and it needs to be in the book. Why? Because there's a big thing about electricity in this entire book. I needed it in there. And so that was rather frustrating. And then there's also another really interesting thing about this book that I keep finding rather fascinating. And I think I've just used rather like 6 times in a row. I feel kind of British, rather. So I've noticed a lot of people talking about these books, and I saw it in both of the books in reviews, but particularly in this one, they talk about how modern Madeline is, and she's really not. That's what's so fascinating to me, is that Madeline wasn't modern for her time. She was actually rather traditional, particularly because people assume that she's wealthy. She's actually not wealthy. She's middle to upper middle class, but she's not wealthy as most people think. They had 2 servants, if you will. They had a maid of all work, and then they had a cook. Well, Madeline doesn't have a mother in the home. They kind of had to have a cook for all those years, and they're not just going to fire her when Madeline gets old enough, because most people at that time period had house help. It was rather common even for people, there goes the rather. It was common for people, who were just middle class. As an example, and it's not, good historical research, but just to kind of illustrate, if you've ever seen Meet Me in St. Louis, they have Katie, the cook. And Katie, I think, actually did more than just cooking, but the point being is that they're just middle class. He's a lawyer. They're middle class in St. Louis, and yet they have house help. Well, the same is true of, Madeline and her father. They don't live in the wealthiest area of town. They do live in a much more modest home with much nicer homes surrounding them. Some, not all of them. Some are rather modest as well. But then like the local banker, who is the wealthiest man in town, he lives just 4 doors down in their neighborhood. Why? Because the guy's a miser. So he built a rather large, imposing house in not quite the most fashionable area. And so he saved a little money, and Madeline's father was actually rather astute and, bought while things were low, figuring out where, neighborhoods were going to go. So it's kind of an interesting thing. She's really actually not wealthy, but she's not modern for her time period. In the early 1900s, girls were starting to go to college. It was becoming, people didn't balk at the idea of a girl furthering her education by that point. It's not that they were all pushing their daughters off to college, but when a girl went off to college, it wasn't unheard of. Girls would graduate from high school, and if they didn't already have a boyfriend, you know, a sweetheart who was courting her and they were likely to become engaged, they often would go get, you know, secretarial type jobs, clerks, shop associates, you know, things like that. They would get these jobs until they got married. And so it wasn't that uncommon. The more radical side were people who got involved in things like the suffragette movement, the Women's Temperance Union, things like that. Those were a little more surprising and radical and modern, if you will. But Madeline doesn't want to have anything to do with most of that. She doesn't even necessarily want a job per se. She just doesn't want to be expected to spend all her days in endless committee meetings that she thinks are worthless. She's bored. She doesn't want to be bored. If she could go off to college and not annoy her aunt, she'd do it. Not because she wants to be this new radical young lady, but just because she would find it interesting, and there's no reason not to. Because it wasn't unacceptable. But the aunt has these ideas and she's trying to show respect for her aunt, even though her aunt drives her crazy. And so I think it's rather interesting that here she is trying to do the very traditional, the very normal things, and so many people think she's just this crazy modern girl, and actually she really wasn't. This book also has a lot of your old friends in it, you know, from the first book. You know, Henry Hardwick is back, Flossie is back. There's a couple little skirmishes with Warren in this one, of course. You know, readers need to be able to see what's happening with characters that they got invested in the first book, and so they come back in here. You see a little bit more of Edith. You get to see another side of Smythe that you did not get from book one, and it was really hard for me to write that, because of course I just want to write him as just this complete and total Snidely Whiplash type villain, and it's just not realistic. And so it was interesting to show this other side of him. It was interesting to get to see Abigail Cooper again. There are just so many characters that are back. And it was hard because I don't want to take too much away from her story, but she is who she is because of the other people in her life, right? And so I had to put those in there. Interesting note, at the end, just as I was almost done with this book, no, actually it was after I was done with this book. It hasn't been that long, but just as I was working on some of the ideas for the next book is the one where she's reading a book, and it's fine print, and I was having a really hard time because I wasn't in love with any of the ideas I was coming up with. I had a few things that I liked, and there were certain elements that I did love, but how I was going to use them, I wasn't really sure about. And you know, well, then I read a book. It's Just the Way You Are by Pepper Basham. Highly recommend it. I'll link my book review to it. Despite the stick your head in the freezer kisses, it's a fabulous book. But seriously, great book. But there's this one little thing that happens in there. It's minor, but my brain went, got all kinds of crazy ideas. And now I am dying to write the third book. And I can't because I have to write all these other ones first. But I'm hoping that book 3 will be out in winter of 2018. It could inch into spring, but I'm really hoping not to. So, hope you liked the little tease of such a tease, and we will see you back next week with another book chat or something else. Stay tuned.